Welcome back. Canada's supply chains are a vital link in our trading economy. Here's a look at those transport links by the numbers. Overall, the transport sector was worth 3.6% of the Canadian economy in 2021, or $72 billion. It's a sector that in 2020 employed 539,100 people, or 3.4% of the workforce. As for how goods move, road transport accounts for 50% of trade, while 23% of it moves by water, 15% by air, and 12% by rail. Experts say Canada needs to invest $4.4 trillion over the next 48 years to modernize and protect our transport system, with the vast majority going to roads at $3.3 trillion, followed by rail networks at $284 billion and seaports at $110 billion. Climate change risks are a big factor. In BC, wildfires in 2021 cost the economy $163 million a day in lost rail capacity, while floods later that year cost $170 million a day. The recent Federal Supply Chain Task Force makes a series of recommendations, ranging from helping to pay to clear terminals to addressing labor shortages and moving faster to reopen the fast centers that facilitate trucking trade. Along with those recommendations, the National Supply Chain Task Force thinks it's time Canada created a permanent supply chain office with federal reporting and accountability. Louise Yako was co-chair of the task force. Thanks for being with us, Louise.
Thanks for the invitation, Amanda.
So it's a really exhaustive look at our supply chains, what needs to happen, and then the list of recommendations, including things that are quite pandemic related, like clearing out terminals, even if we have to pay to help move things. The task force says do it immediately. In fact, the top sort of 7 or 8 things are immediate action. Do you get the sense that immediate action will be taken?
I do, and part of the reason I have that sense is that the report was made public almost immediately after we provided it to the minister. So to me, that's a really good sign. He is also traveling the country this week, and they've dubbed it Supply Chain Week, and he's making a series of announcements that are intended to improve supply chain productivity, efficiency, competitiveness, agility, all of those things that he had asked us to look at in our report.
We know our ports, they were very much in focus, as were ports everywhere during pandemic. Port of Vancouver gets a dismal rating globally in terms of how it stacks up and delays, et cetera. Can we easily fix those for the long term? Because this task force didn't just look at the now, it's looking up ahead 50 years into sort of how we, as you say, future-proof our supply chains.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, I think our more important recommendations were the long-term strategic ones that you mentioned, and that is how do we change the mindset, both of industry and government, about the value of the transportation supply chain, and what kinds of investments do we need to make in order to improve our competitiveness with other countries.
You know, one of the things that will make some people gnash their teeth, and I'm one of them, was you note that interprovincial trade barriers, you don't necessarily call them that, but that's what they are one of the biggest friction points in our transport system. We still have rules on trucks that keeps a truck from rolling through Quebec and into Ontario easily. How can we change that? Because those friction points have been well known for decades, really, and it's just high time we got rid of as many of them as we could.
Yeah, one of the things we did was we changed our terminology. So before we used, I think the common term that we used was harmonization. We wanted things to be exactly the same across the country. Instead, we want recognition, regulatory recognition, not only across the country, but also with the United States, because they are our most important trading partner.
And so that's a key point here. And we know from the report that obviously road transport is a pretty critical piece here. We've seen in recent years political interference can be really one of the biggest sticking points. It's true also has been true for rail. Do you think you'll see an empowered government that says we're going to intervene more rapidly and more forcefully if our supply chains are broken up in any way by some kind of political protest?
I think the fact that the task force was named, that there's been a supply chain summit, that there's a series of recommendations that are being made this week, there's general recognition not only by government, who I think always recognize the value of the transportation supply chain, but also by the public. I don't think the public will stand by and allow for those kinds of things to happen, because there is clear understanding that international trade is really we need to be able to support our international trade in order for us to be competitive.
Appreciate your time so much, Louise. This is great.
You're very welcome.
Louise Yako is co-chair of the National Supply Chain Task Force. Well, along with our international trade, Canada's manufacturing firms depend on a solid supply chain and transport sector to function well. It's not the only thing they need to modernize and compete, though. Jason Myers is CEO of Next Generation Manufacturing Canada. Thanks for being with us, Jason.
Thanks, Amanda. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you. And of course, you were with the Canadian manufacturers and exporters. Now it makes sense, I guess, that your next iteration would be to think about the future of manufacturing in Canada. It fits with this notion of modernizing and future-proofing our supply chain, because if we don't get that piece right, of course, why would anybody want to build things here? Let's start with how we're doing. Are we able to attract the new business that we want so we have the jobs that we want?
I think the key thing is new business. We're not going to be attracting manufacturing companies that are doing business elsewhere in traditional sectors. We're going to be attracting manufacturing companies that are innovative, that are using advanced technologies to win business in world markets. And we're going to be attracting manufacturing companies that need to expand their capacity. And I think Canada has a lot to offer for companies that are doing that, a great innovation ecosystem, but also, of course, things like clean energy, which are really top of the agenda today for a lot of manufacturing companies looking at putting investments here in Canada.
There are gaps between our ambition on those files, Jason, and where we are today. And you could talk about hydrogen. You could even just talk about EV in general. We'd like to be big players, but there's a long way to go. Are we doing, in your view, what we need to do so that it becomes a practical success? Again, we want things to be made here so that it's actual jobs here, not just be purchasers of other people's hydrogen or electric vehicles.
Absolutely. And I think the key thing here is to go to where the puck is going to be in, say, 5 years' time. We're going to be focusing on, or need to focus on, the innovation challenges that stand in the way of a sustainable EV sector or sustainable decarbonization strategies for industry. And we have a lot to offer in that area here. But I think the key is let's look forward to the future. We have, for instance, on the EV value chain, big challenges in terms of environmentally sustainable processing of critical minerals. We don't have enough people, enough engineers worldwide to design and test all of the components and powertrain and electronics and materials going into the EVs that have already been announced. So, I mean, there are issues like that where we have a long, really very, very important strategic challenges, but where Canada can bring our AI strengths, our strengths around quantum computing, our strengths in the advanced materials sectors to bear. And I think that's really where the advantage for Canada lies. It's not necessarily right now, but it's getting to where we need to be in 5 years' time.
Of course, one of the big questions for many will be, if I have a job today in manufacturing in Canada, or I'm training for one, but will I have or will I be qualified for one of these future jobs? That kind of retraining or upskilling, or however we want to talk it. People have done it over the course of time in the auto industry and elsewhere. They can pivot and learn new things. Should people be worried that they'll be shut out of this next generation manufacturing, or is it something that will actually be inclusive for Canadian workers?
Well, I think Canadian manufacturers really have to keep pace with where the trends are going, and in terms of innovation, in terms of the strategic opportunities that are opening up in supply chains. I mean, there are a lot of supply chain problems out there, but at the same time, there are new opportunities opening up for Canadian companies that can move fast and that have the capability to be able to pivot into those supply chains. It's not just about technology, as you say. A large part of it is about the skills that we have. And so reskilling, upskilling, vitally important. But the other big challenge for Canadian industry, and not only manufacturing, but in the manufacturing sector, 25% of the workforce is going to be retired by 2030. And our ability to attract the younger generation into the sector is, has to be much stronger than it is today. We're only attracting 6%. So we've got a labor shortage, but we're going to be facing really significant skill shortages in the near term. And frankly, we've been doing a lot of work to attract young people into advanced manufacturing careers. I'm not concerned about young people. I'm concerned about whether or not Canadian companies can keep pace with the expectations of young people here, that they will be working in technology and working on some of the big challenges that face Canadian society, face a global society in terms of climate change, in terms of food security, health and safety.
Jason, so good to have you. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Amanda. Nice to be here.
Jason Meyer, CEO of nGEn. Coming up, the world's biggest tobacco firm charts a course to a future without cigarettes. But first, it was the end of an era in Britain with the death of a queen who presided over a franchise that might have lost some of its luster in recent years, but was once incredibly lucrative. At 96, the death was to be expected. We refer, of course, to that other Queen of Britain, Angela Lansbury, who died this week. The franchise, the once mighty Murder, She Wrote. If you're young enough, you have no idea who I'm talking about. But for a certain generation, it is truly the end of an era. We're back after this.